welcome back, everyone. I'm Perry Carter, your host for this morning's professional development session. And again, our theme this week for BDPA Con 21 is Power Together, a Revolution of Excellence. And this morning, we have a very exciting guest. She's returning again to work with us. Earlier this year, we had Dr. Kearney supporting us during our Earth Day Tech Summit here in Washington, D.C. And we're glad to have her back for BDPA's 43rd Annual National Technology Conference. Today's presentation is going to be on the Foreign Affairs IT Fellowship, which is funded by the Department of State. And this year's presentation with BDPA is going to highlight its missions, objectives, and innovative two-year fellowship. The program's path to a career in foreign service provides academic funding for an IT-related degree, internships, professional development, and mentorship. And it culminates in an appointment to the Foreign Service as an information management specialist. Very exciting career and career paths. Now, this morning's special guest is Dr. Yolanda Kearney, and she's a proud alumna of Howard University right here in Washington, D.C., from which she earned undergraduate, graduate, and doctoral degrees in music history and literature, music education, and religious studies. Now, within the Department of State, her experiences embrace STEM education as a driver for sustainable economic growth and innovation. Her state career has permitted her to meet program astronauts Mae Jemison and Robert Kirby, and astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson to support the department's STEM initiatives. It is a great joy to see international students enthused about the possibility of studying in the United States and managing educational exchange programs, which is one of the most gratifying parts of her job. And her last post was Counselor of Public Affairs, Embassy Kinshasa. And earlier in her career, she was a music historian working for the Library of Congress and Special Materials Division and the Music Division. Her academic focus was American music, and it was her great pleasure to work on the library's I Hear America Singing web exhibitions and concert series. And earlier, I was just sharing with her some of the interns that we have here in BDPA are now taking some of our content and curating a lot of the history that we've had in BDPA and moving our content that you have on Popular Technology TV, BDPA Today, and National BDPA social media platforms. We're moving that content over to mixed reality and extended reality platforms. So this is very exciting. And without further ado, Dr. Kearney, welcome back to BDPA.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I am always happy to be with BDPA. And thank you for allowing me to talk about three really interesting career paths in the Foreign Service. So in typical government style, I'm going to share my screen. It's going to be a PowerPoint. Brace yourselves. I was joking earlier that I may have to threaten my son with some degree of violence because of my bandwidth. So before we get started, I want to tell you about the State Department and what it is that we're looking for. So yes, we've heard it all about us being pale, male, and Yale, which is to say that we are underrepresented when it comes to our goal of creating a foreign service that looks like the United States that it represents. So we're looking for you. We're looking for you to bring all of your authentic self to the table when it comes to this discussion about the implementation, the carrying out, and the crafting of foreign policy. We are at 276 posts in 191 countries. There is really no better way that I can think of to see the world than in the Foreign Service. We're headquartered in Washington, D.C. at the State Department. And then a domestic tour for us. There are domestic tours in the United States and then overseas tours at those 191 countries. But domestic tours for us may not always be in Washington, D.C. We have passport agencies and field offices in almost every state of the United States, and also in Puerto Rico and in Guam and some of our other territories. So domestic for us still includes a really broad array of choices of where it is that we're going to work. Right off the top, I want to let you know what it is that we are looking for. We don't make any secret about these things. About 32 years ago, the State Department took a look at ourselves and we said, if we had to build a perfect foreign service employee, what would that person look like? What would those key attributes be? And we came up with these, the Foreign Service dimensions. So if you look at this list, these are things that really any employer would want. But for us, we find that these are the things that are the best predictors of success in the Foreign Service. So some people are going to get these through their life experience. Some people are going to get these, they're going to acquire them through their education experience. Most people acquire them through a combination of the two. But again, you don't have to read tea leaves. This is what we're looking for. This is what we evaluate against and our entry process, in addition to special skills, IT, for example. And finally, once you're in the Foreign Service, every year when our annual evaluations are written, they're written against the Foreign Service precepts, which are themselves based on these Foreign Service dimensions. So no reading tea leaves, no guessing what it is we're looking for. There they are. Really briefly, I want to tell you about me. I joined the Foreign Service as a Foreign Service officer in June of 2004. Colin Powell was our Secretary of State at the time, very much the face of our recruitment opportunities and our outreach. In the middle, that's at my last tour in Kinshasa, the Democratic Republic of Congo. I'm greeting there Nikki Haley, who at the time was our ambassador to the United Nations. The last image I keep in as a reminder to stay humble. That's my first press conference ever as a mission spokesperson. I was scared to death, as you can see. I am clutching that podium for dear life. I survived, as did the podium somehow. So these things are important. Just know that there's no situation that is so bad that you can't make it worse. And in that instance, I was lucky that I did not. I want to talk to you today about Foreign Service Specialist opportunities. So you're going to hear Foreign Service generalists or Foreign Service officers like myself. We're focused on policy. Our Foreign Service specialists are diplomats with extra skills or specific skills, and they're in really broad categories, 8 broad categories. We're going to spend most of our time today talking about information management, but we're also going to talk about our office managers and our financial management officers, because these are areas that overlap nicely with the BDPA and the skill sets that your members have. So let's talk first about data management at state, and that really is the purview of our Foreign Service Office Management Specialists. They serve in our embassies and consulates worldwide, as well as in the United States, and they perform a range of administrative and operational program support functions and technical program support functions. They serve in some cases as the ambassador's confidential assistant and deputy chief of mission. That's the ambassador's deputy, the number 2 at an embassy. They're confidential assistants. They are oftentimes responsible for the ambassador's schedule and all things related to the ambassador's schedule. They are frequently the managers of our protocol officers at our embassies. So someone has to know exactly how to say thank you to someone when they give a gift to the ambassador. You might be surprised at how many rules there are around those things. When the ambassador has a meeting and comes out of the office and says, oh, that was a great meeting and we're going to continue that conversation. We're going to have dinner this evening at my house for 8 people. It is the oftentimes the ambassador's office management specialist who will coordinate with the ambassador's house staff to make sure that that dinner meeting happens on very, very short notice. So the primary responsibilities in the office are things that you would expect. Clearly a knowledge of administrative operations, program support principles. They have to have a very strong command of the English language. They are drafting correspondence for the ambassador and the deputy chief of mission. Really excellent interpersonal skills. They are the first person who often greets the prime minister or coming to see the ambassador, the ministers of government and others. And most importantly, a strong in-depth knowledge of office computer software. Now, I know what you're thinking. In the past, in the bad old days, in the boomer days, an administrative assistant or an office manager didn't necessarily have to have those kinds of tech skills. This is 2021, and it's been a minute, but it really is very key for office managers to have those strong knowledge of computer software skills. Not hardware, but software applications and all the things that may go wrong. So again, managing the office, being the ambassador or the deputy chief of missions, confidential assistant, managing the protocol office and officer, managing, being that liaison between the ambassador and the deputy chief of mission and their residential staff, all the things that make an embassy run when it comes to the front office with the ambassador and the deputy chief of mission. Also serving in sections of the embassy, they will frequently play those same roles for the political section chief, the economic section chief, the regional security officer section chief. So these are really exciting positions. They travel a lot with the principals that they support. So if the ambassador is going to go out on the road and country, frequently the office manager will also travel for some of those events, certainly manage all that travel and the logistics associated with it. So if your interest is, yes, I love computer software, I'm not really quite so interested in tinkering around with hardware, and you like the idea of having a day, day to day, or it could be very different, then an office management specialist position may well be the right choice for you. Our financial management at state is quite complex, as the length of this slide might show you. But again, this overlaps with the skill sets that BDPA professionals have. Frequently, our financial management officers are required to conduct forensic accounting in some cases. They serve as the chief financial officer at the embassy or the consulate where they're working. They act as certifying officers for all of the US government agencies that are at that embassy. So a reminder that an embassy is like a little snapshot of the United States government. The ambassador is the president's representative and the chief of the entire mission. But there may be several agencies at that embassy or consulate. State Department, of course, but USAID may be there. The Department of Defense will certainly be represented there. Department of Treasury may be there. Homeland Security, you name it, USAID and others, CDC, NIH. So however many US government agencies are present at an embassy or a consulate, the ambassador is, again, the president's representative, so the chief of that mission. But every US agency that is there has some need for some financial transactions. They have to be able to pay their staff. Someone has to do that certifying, and that is our chief financial officer, our financial management officers. They develop budgets and financial plans, and they control those expenditures. Now, this may seem like something that is pretty straightforward, but what if you're working in a country where the exchange rate changes not just once a week or once a month, but changes several times a day? Our chief financial officers are in charge of keeping up with all of those exchange rate fluctuations, making sure that our payrolls, our salary allowance and payments, our cashier operations, all the purchase of foreign currency that we do, and the disbursement of funds, all of that happens, and that at the end of the day, it all equals out. So I will tell you that Yolanda is not the person that you want to do this, because I would probably round up or down, and I think they frown upon that. Our chief financial management officers also establish and maintain very close relationships with the local banking officials and fiscal authorities, as you might imagine, to make sure that we have enough local currency on hand. Some of our transactions in country must be carried out in the local currency instead of dollars. And so again, it is our chief financial officers who are responsible for that. This part about analyzing financial aspects of various programs so that different agencies can understand the best use of their resources. They are responsible for ensuring compatibility with the requirements of the Office of Management and Budget and the General Accounting Office back in the United States and Treasury. Obviously, we want to make sure that no agency ever needs to be audited for lack of proper oversight. So it's our chief financial officers who are responsible for that. Excuse me. They have large numbers of locally employed staff. So at an embassy, there are, of course, American generalists and specialists, these jobs that I'm talking about, but the backbone of our staffing is really locally employed staff. Those are citizens of the country, of the host country in which we're operating. They are locally employed staff. In some cases, there are Americans in country who are also working at the embassy, and of course, direct hire staff who are hired by the State Department or whatever other agency is at that embassy or consulate. So the Chief Financial Officer is responsible for training and supervising all of those locally employed staff, those US direct hire staff and contractors who provide all the support for the accounting and financial work that's done. And then finally, probably most importantly, they establish the controls using the policy guidelines for accepted accounting standards. They are responsible for prevention of waste, fraud, and mismanagement. And as I said, when it comes to forensic accounting, in some cases where there's been an accusation of fraud or mismanagement or waste, it's our Chief Financial Officer who's responsible for all of that. So before we talk about IT straightforward, I wanted to make sure that there are some careers that are adjacent to IT that may also be interesting for you. And let's talk finally about tech at state. So there are three sort of general areas when it comes to specifically tech at state. Our information management specialist, and that's the job that leads to, that the FATE Fellowship leads to. They manage and operate all of our information technology infrastructure, including PC local and our wide area networks, all the telecommunications, all the telephone, UHF, VHF programs, the diplomatic pouch, and mail service. So a reminder to you that every embassy has a mailroom, and that mailroom is officially part of the US Postal Service. So all things communication fall under the information management specialist, including that diplomatic pouch. That's the mail that is sent, secret, comes out with a courier. Someone physically has to take it. All of that, every way that we communicate falls under the information management specialist. Our information management technical specialists, we have two. One focused on radio, and those duties are performing site surveys and installation and maintenance of the hardware and the software required for all of our land mobile systems. We use sat phones frequently in a lot of countries and other satellite-based communications. And then we have technical specialists for unified communications. They're responsible for the installation, repair, and maintenance of all of our telecommunications and computer systems. The information management technical specialists, both radio and unified communications, both report to the information management specialist. So again, if you you don't want to maybe supervise people, but you really like the thought of repairing stuff when people like Yolanda, end users, tear up stuff, then that may be something that is of interest for you. And then for the radio folks who like to, I like SAT, Yolanda, the public affairs officer, says that she wants to take the ambassador up country where there's very little infrastructure. And when she gets there, she also wants to show a movie and have the ambassador host something, basically creating that infrastructure so that we can do something like that. In a case like that, I'm going to go to the information management specialist. I'm going to tell them this thing that I've dreamed up for the ambassador to do when we take them on the road. They're going to look at me and say, okay, Yolanda. And then they're going to essentially create that infrastructure to make that happen. So that's our IT at Tech team. So I want to talk a little bit more about information management specialists because this is where the opportunity for funding for schooling rests. So as I said, our information management specialists work very, very closely with senior staff. They ensure that the more than 90, that's correct number, 90 State Department platforms are performing the specific needs at post. They work very closely with diplomatic security for all the reasons you might imagine. The consular systems also, when people come in to apply for their visas, we use biometrics to process that. Clearly that has to work well, but something that you may not have thought about is public diplomacy, the public facing. What about outside of the embassy? And so in public diplomacy, PD officers like myself rely heavily on the expertise of our IT colleagues. They ensure that the hardware and the networks in our American spaces remain safe and operational. So at every embassy, there will be something called American spaces. They used to be called libraries, but they're much more than that these days. So yes, there are books that people can borrow, but also we provide unfettered internet access. In some cases, the only place in country where there's unfettered internet access. People have the opportunity to come in and get on our networks on their own devices. It might not surprise you that once people are in, they do things like download torrents or other really interesting things that they try to do. So we have to make sure that our American Spaces networks remain safe and operational. Our information management specialists serve as our subject matter experts for tech camps. So tech camps are hands-on workshops that provide private sector technology experts and some of our key populations. Those include journalists, some NGOs, sometimes civil society. Sometimes we do tech camps with girls. When there's an issue with girls schooling, I've had several tech camps where we're just going to have a coding camp for the day. And frequently, because I am not a coding expert, I would either have to ask my 13-year-old or someone who actually has the real technical expertise how I should set that up. And frequently, that's going to be the information management specialist. They're going to be able to provide me with the information I need to set up these types of tech camps, and most importantly, make sure that our American spaces remain safe. So for diplomatic security and consular systems, clearly, we have to be able to communicate securely with Washington. There are all sorts of actors out there, state actors and non-state actors, that want to make sure that they can sort of listen in to what the ambassador is saying. Our information management specialists ensure that that doesn't happen. They tell me sometimes it's like a little game of cat and mouse, but they make sure that we're able to communicate securely in our homes, on our phones, in the embassy, outside of the embassy. And clearly for diplomatic security and consular, as I said, for biometrics, that is going to be very key. I'm going to talk to you about the diplomatic fellowships that will allow you to not only join the State Department as an information management specialist, but pay for it. So our diplomatic fellowships require a minimum GPA of 3.2. They include internships and a 5-year work commitment, which is to say that at the end of the fellowship, you will go into the Foreign Service as an information management specialist. In exchange for your 2 years of schooling, you owe the State Department at least 5 years of service. The hope, the desire, and the plan is that you will enjoy the job and see it as an opportunity to continue a career as an information management specialist. The FATE, Foreign Affairs IT Fellowship, application typically opens in December with an early February deadline. So like all of our programs, it has 4 prongs. It's a mentoring program. The first is you're going to be matched with a mentor at the beginning of this program, someone who is already an IMS, to be able to tell you what the job is going to be like. It's a scholarship program because it pays for schooling. It pays for 2 years of schooling. It's an internship program because there is a domestic internship in a bureau or an office in the State Department one summer, and the following summer, an internship at an embassy or a consulate. So you get to see exactly what an IMS does in the United States at the State Department and also at an embassy or a consulate. And then finally, it's an employment program, most importantly, because it leads to the job as the information management specialist. So the FATE Fellowship has some really wonderful flexibility. I keep saying that it pays for 2 years of schooling, and those options are a rising junior can opt to have, or a sophomore can apply as a sophomore and opt to have the junior and senior years of undergraduate study paid for, or a graduating senior can apply and opt to have a 2-year master's degree program in an IT-related field paid for. The undergraduate must already be enrolled in an IT-related field, and we'll go over specifically the disciplines that are accepted. The academic funding is $37,500 each year for 2 years to support tuition, room and board, books, mandatory fees, and some travel expenses as well. So $37,500 a year for 2 years for either junior and senior years of undergraduates for sophomores applying, or for a 2-year master's program for a senior applying. And the 2 paid internships, that is true, paid, you receive a stipend. So I need you to know how rare it is for an internship to come with a stipend or payment of any sort. But those 2 internships are also paid. You receive a stipend, again, one in a bureau or office in the Department of State, and the other at an embassy or a consulate abroad. I really think it's important to focus also on the fact that you get personalized mentoring throughout the 2-year program. This is really important because we understand in the State Department, we are very, very underrepresented when it comes to African Americans, in particular in tech. We know that you have options to take your talents almost anywhere, but perhaps you have not thought about a career overseas and with the State Department because we just haven't told you that it exists. So in addition to those 2 years of mentoring, the professional development opportunities do include those 10-week professional development series during the first summer internship. So you're going to be in the Department of State working with IMSs domestically, and also you'll have opportunities to take classes that lead to certifications that you may not have. As I said before, the State Department maintains 90, actually more than 90 platforms at our embassies and consulates. Remember, we've got all of these agencies. USAID might do things slightly differently than the Department of Defense. And it may be that NIH has something slightly different than CDC. So all of those various pieces and parts of agencies that are present at an embassy or consulate may have their own platforms. And yes, as the IT expert, you're going to need to have to master all of them. So to apply for the 2022 cohort, first of all, you have to be a US citizen enrolled full-time in a degree program relevant to IT if you're applying as a sophomore. If you are, excuse me, these are things that apply to sophomores. You must be entering your junior year in the fall of 2022, or you must be entering an IT-related master's program beginning in the fall of 2022. You have to have that minimum 3.2 GPA on a 4.0 scale at the time of the application and maintain that GPA throughout the fellowship. To be perfectly honest, to be really competitive for this fellowship, you need to be upwards of a 3.5 in all honesty, because these are very, very heavily bid, highly subscribed, really, really popular programs. And so while the 3.2 is the minimum, I think you need to be looking around 3.5 and above to be seriously competitive. Then you have to be able to pass the US State Department medical and security clearances and a final suitability requirement. Our medical requirements are that you are able to be deployed anywhere worldwide availability, and our security clearances require a top secret. If you already have a top secret clearance from another agency, we don't enjoy reciprocity with other agencies. However, those who have those clearances find that our clearance process goes much more quickly. And then most importantly, you have to be prepared to enter the Foreign Service in the fall of 2024 at the end of your studies. So again, for sophomores, if you're a sophomore applying, you have to be enrolled in a full-time degree program already, and that degree program needs to be relevant to IT. And you have to be entering your junior year in the fall of 2022. So sophomore, meaning I've got 60 credits, right? Or I'm a junior and I'm definitely done, and I'm not, not just the end of 2 years, but by credits, end of your sophomore going to your junior year. And then again, for seniors, you have to be going into a master's degree program beginning in the fall of 2022. So most majors in IT fields are eligible for FATE. Some of the common majors include computer science and computer systems management, cybersecurity, information technology, computer engineering, IT services administration. Yes, IT services administration does also count. That is a perfectly acceptable degree program. Online degree programs from accredited institutions are eligible. So if you are in an online program and that program is accredited, fully accredited by the Department of Education's various accrediting agencies, that is eligible for application for FATE. So those common majors include Again, computer science and computer systems management, IT services administration, information technology, cybersecurity. We have tons of cybersecurity applicants, and computer engineering, computer systems engineering also. I want to tell you where we do all of this training. The Foreign Service Institute is just outside of Washington in Arlington, and it's the United States government's premier foreign affairs training center. It's not just the State Department that trains there, but many people from other agencies also train. We have a School of Language Studies. So as you might imagine, as we go around the world, we have to be able to speak whatever language is necessary in the host country. And so that's where we study. We have a School of Professional and Area Studies. That is, for example, for policy folks. So public diplomacy, tradecraft, political tradecraft, econ tradecraft, etc. There's the School of Applied Information Technology, which I want to point out to you is completely separate from everything else. This is where our IT folks train. They train there on our classified systems. They train on all of the other peripheral systems that are going to be necessary to carry out their duties. We also take leadership and management very seriously. We have a standalone School of Leadership and Management. So a reminder that the information management specialist is the boss of folks, right? You're going to be supervising people. And so you will receive training in leadership and management also. And then finally, the Office of the Historian also resides at the Foreign Service Institute. I want to tell you how to get in touch with me, and I'm going to put in the chat a link to ways that you can find your diplomat in residence if I am not your dip. So I am the diplomat in residence for DC Metro. I cover Washington, DC, Delaware, Maryland, and West Virginia. Again, my parents really did choose to anglicize a Spanish name. It really is spelled that way, Londa, but that's how you can find me at DIR DC Metro at state.gov. You can find us on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and all major platforms. A word about Facebook. I know I could almost hear some groans happening right then. So Facebook is the State Department's global branding partner. It performs incredibly well for us and for other agencies outside of the United States. So that is not, it's not that the State Department is not aware of popularity of Facebook. It's that it is our global branding platform. So just know that that's the case. I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I'm certain that there are some questions that you may have for me. And I want us to have a conversation about what the career trajectory looks like and what life in the Foreign Service is like.
Well, thank you, Dr. Kearney. Thank you very much. And yes, we do have some questions. Some of these questions we actually had with you during our Earth Day Tech Summit earlier this year as well. The first one we usually get is, are these slides available for everybody who registered for the conference?
Right, so I'm happy to put together all the information that I just gave you. Frankly, everything that I just told you is on our careers page, careers.state.gov. However, I realize that that is a lot of information to sort of weed through, so I'm happy to pass that information along. I do have some things I'm going to put in the chat because I think that that also is going to help you. Okay, good. So the questions, and I'll give you the broad topics, and then we can scroll down to the specifics. We're going to talk about, you mentioned security clearances, world travel, different languages in different countries, the technology challenges abroad, especially in countries that are underdeveloped, and small business opportunities. And you also mentioned on the financial side, people may be curious about cryptocurrencies that are evolving. And then, of course, we're going to close out. We close in about maybe 20 minutes, but we're going to close out about your thoughts and career path with respect to how you take advantage of what we call diversity of thought, and for instance, how you work with the NGOs, USAID, and other agencies, and even with BDPA, your liaison with the private sector. So the first question that comes up is on security clearances. What would you recommend to high school students that are in the pipeline right now through our BDPA Sites program, all of our college students, and even students that are not in degree programs, but they have interest in technical fields? Just talk briefly about the path to security clearances and what they must do, and more importantly, what they must not do. Oh, this is such a great question. Thank you for asking, really. So very soon you are going to leave the part of your life where you can say, I was young and dumb, right? And soon it will be, it's just bad judgment. And what you don't want is to be accused of bad judgment. So if you have not ever taken a look at your credit report, you may want to just, every year you can write away for it for free and get a copy of that. It may be that you went to the dentist or something and you didn't pay your copay, you didn't see it or whatever, and now something that was $25 has been reported. You just want a really good history of making sure that you take care of your financial responsibilities. That's one thing that frequently gets people in trouble. The second is, again, you're young, and we have ambassadors who were students in the 60s. All right. So your experimental use of recreational drugs, right? It may be legal in the state where you live, but don't forget that marijuana, for example, is not legal when it comes to the federal government. You can argue whether or not that's the way that should be, but just be very, very careful about that. And if you have partaken or do partake, just be very forthcoming about your habits, right? Because you're going to have a med clearance. So you don't want those two things to be incongruent. I told diplomatic security one thing, and then my med said something else. You definitely don't want those two things to clash, like your med and your security clearance. Definitely, you don't want those things to not match. Most importantly, I just think it's important to pull together all of your documentation. You want to make sure that this goes as smoothly as possible. So if you have traveled overseas as a student or even on vacation, have an idea in your mind what those dates were. When did we go to, we went to Tokyo. It was that the summer of 2009 or was it 10? Have all that together. If your parents have your passports, it's a good time to write off to your mom and say, hey, can you send me my passport? So you can see your date stamps. As clear as you can be about your travel history, that's going to make your life much easier and make things easier for the people who are conducting your security clearance also. So don't have some sort of fuzzy, I know we went to Tokyo, it was sometime in the 2000s, so as clear as you can be about that, I think. But most importantly, just make sure that your financial obligations are met, that you don't have any craziness out there. And I know they're handing out credit cards on college campuses like candy, but make sure that you have a good history of taking care of your financial obligations.
Thank you. And also, I think if you can just explain, even to our audiences, people in our community may be able to get their clearances faster because typically we don't travel abroad and very little outreach. So do you find that sometimes advantageous for communities of color?
I really don't know because I don't have the overall numbers and patterns for the general population. So that very well may be true, certainly in that aspect of not having to look for travel.
Understood.
That certainly should be true.
And that takes us to our next area of world travel. Can you just briefly touch on some of the languages that may be helpful? If you see resumes come through and students applying for the fellowships, what are some of the languages that would be nice to already have, or the training that you would have for different countries?
Yeah, so the State Department really doesn't care what you speak, really, because at some point in the career, you could be anywhere to use anything. If you have a world language already, that's Spanish, Portuguese, French, languages you can speak in multiple countries. Sure, that could be helpful, but there's no requirement for language to join the Foreign Service. The Foreign Service Institute is where we train for languages. I came into the Foreign Service with Spanish and German, and I was taught French at the Foreign Service Institute. I studied for 24 weeks, and then I went off to post fluent. So we very, very much trust our language training. So I wouldn't worry necessarily about having to have a specific language. If you are not studying a language already, think about it, please do. A language acquisition is wonderful to have, and it can only benefit you to be able to speak some other, at least another language. But I wouldn't worry necessarily. And because it's not a requirement, there's no particular advantage to a candidate who does or does not have a foreign language.
Thank you. And the next one talks about the technology or technical challenges abroad, especially in underdeveloped nations. And in fact, this is probably where the excitement comes into play for students like ours.
Yes. So in some cases, it is really challenging. And I'm an end user, right? So I don't have to worry about all the ins and outs. But I do know that my tech colleagues really do have an uphill battle in some cases. We will build a beautiful embassy, right, with all the things that we need for it to run. But it may be something as simple as the current, right? Just dirty current. And so everything's on some sort of, equalizer to make sure that it doesn't blow out. We blow out a lot of stuff in embassies all the time. Sometimes it comes down to little things that you may not have thought about. If you are in a Francophone country where everyone is used to using a French keyboard, but you're not, then there's some degree of adaptability. Of course, you will have a regular QWERTY keyboard, but understanding that the people that you supervise will not. They will be using the keyboard in a language that in that corresponds to their native language. Those little big things and those types of adjustments are things that I think we have to think about. Get used to 220 because most of the world makes use of it. I think in some cases it's an issue of training in some countries. There is a very real issue of brain drain in some countries, which means that the very best students, they're incredibly bright, and then they will go off to the United States, to Canada, to Europe, to Australia to work. So in that instance, it again sort of falls on the IMS in this instance to provide training and ongoing training and support to folks who are working for them, who may not have had the strongest education, or the opposite is sometimes true, and sometimes it's a mix. We have folks working in our embassies who hold PhDs from countries, and because frequently the embassy is a fantastic employer, it pays very well relative to the rest of the opportunities in countries. So I joke with people, it's not a joke, it's true. At one embassy, there was a gardener who was a PhD in botany. So we just have that ability to draw really well-trained people in some instances. But then there's sometimes, it tends to be one extreme or the other, and sometimes a mix of the two. So people who are incredibly competent and really well-trained, and then some who are not as well-trained and who need that sort of ongoing support and training and supervision. So that's why that leadership and management portion is very, very important for the IMS. So it's not enough for you just to know how to do your job, to be able to manage those 90 platforms. You also have to be able to manage people.
And then talk about some of the challenges that everybody has, but cybersecurity, for an example. Cybersecurity is a problem globally, but it probably has other effects to underserved communities or organizations or nation states that may not have little or no infrastructure.
Yeah, that is always really interesting. So you may find that you're working in a country where the host government has accepted a gift from fill in the blank nation. We're going to build you a new Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and we're going to provide all of the computer, not only the computers and the hardware, but all of the, just the entire structure. We're going to provide all of that. On the one hand, you may say, I don't know if I would love the thought of any country accepting that gift, but okay, they've accepted that gift. Now, but that's your host country, and you're going to be receiving correspondence from members of that country. So on the receiving end, these are the things that make the my tech colleagues really stay on their toes, right? Because you can't just not communicate with your host country because they've accepted a gift of computers or hardware from a nation that has a long history of including spyware. So that is something that is a very, very real and ongoing issue that that we all have to think about and to be wary of as we go about our jobs. And then our iPhones, we communicate after work and outside of the office. So making sure that those stay secure also is really something. I heard one of my technical colleagues, tech professional colleagues call it whack-a-mole. Like, we're always just trying to make sure that everybody is staying safe, Yolanda, staying safe. So if that sounds interesting to you though, there's a lot of it everywhere.
It is. In fact, if you don't mind, you can just draw that thread right into the closing of today's session. Talk about the forensics accounting, and the changing currency. That in and of itself, with cyber and cybersecurity overtones, sounds like a very exciting career no matter which country your students or your interns will be deployed.
Very much so. And thank you so much for underscoring that. If you had not previously thought about ways that you can take those skills on the road, I just need you to know that that is something that is wide open. And again, being a chief financial officer in 2021 is not like it was even 10 years ago. Crypto and all these other, loopholes, and it all gets sort of slippery, and someone has to be responsible for staying on top of that. So those are the skills that we are going to continue to need. So if that is your interest, there's a place for you. There's definitely a place for you in the State Department.
And then finally, the two that might be very closely aligned, we talk about public affairs and then tech policy, the policy in the nations that we support. If you don't mind, just share with us a few moments left, the exciting opportunities for students that are interested in either one of those areas.
Definitely so. So I am a public diplomacy career track officer. My portfolio includes all things public facing. So our official website, all of our social media platforms, everything, press releases that go out, all of our press and media relations. Then the other side of the house is educational and cultural affairs and policy, visiting scholars, et cetera. But I will give you a very real example. In my last post in the Democratic Republic of Congo, when elections were going a little haywire, the government shut down communications. Now, this seems impossible. Like for an American, you can't even imagine, like the government shut off the internet, what? So, but yes, the government did shut off the internet and sent out a message, a communique saying, we're going to shut off the internet under the umbrella of making sure that there was peace, right? And also started to scramble radio signals and et cetera, et cetera. So for us, having a way to work around that is great. So we were able to continue to communicate when large swaths of the country was unable to do so. So that is a type of stuff that sounds like something out of a movie, but really is happening that you think would be interesting. I'm telling you that there is definitely a place for you in the State Department. And we do have those conversations with governments all the time about press freedom and about freedom of assembly, and electronic assembly is freedom of assembly. People not being able to talk to each other because you scramble the signal and you literally shut down the internet is not something that we approve of. But these are sovereign nations that make decisions that they're going to make. And no matter what they choose to do, U.S. government has to be able to continue to function. So that's where our tech folks, our tech professionals are key. Nothing happens without you.
Well, that's very exciting. Well, Dr. Crane, thank you so much for spending time with us again this morning. And as you know, our next big event coming up is Exascale Day, which is October 18th. And then we hope to have you back again next April for Earth Day.
I'd love that.
Yes, ma'am. And again, so do you have any final thoughts you want to share? Contact information was already in the chat, and we'll provide that out to our members and our registrants for the conference as well. Any final thoughts?
In addition to the information from the slides, just know that you have a place in the State Department. There is a place for you at State I know the things that have been written about us and that folks have said about us, pale, male, and yeah, we're aware, we're all aware. But there is a really thriving community of folks of color in the State Department. You would be surprised at just really the camaraderie that we enjoy with everyone, we're not just little clans of like people of color, but some of the greatest friends that I've ever met have been in this job and under some really trying circumstances sometimes. So come see the world with us. It's the water's fine, come on in, and you can definitely focus your talents and take your talents on the road with the State Department.